axon. These are the neurofibrils, fine fibers which pass through the cytoplasm from dendrons to the axon. So, fine filaments passing through the cytoplasm from dendrite to axon are called neurofibrils and help in the passage of nerve impulse. Then number 2, Nigel granules. These are the Nigel granules. These are ribose nucleoproteins. Either excretory or nutritive. Then number 3 is nucleus. This one, nucleus, centrally located single large nucleus. There is a single large nucleus which is located centrally. Then mitochondria, they are numerous and distinct. Then number 5, Golgi apparatus. These are highly developed superficial reticulum of Golgi. Then gray and white matter. Gray matter, because in the brain it is surrounded by gray matter and white matter. It is composed of gray matter and white matter. In some places gray matter is surrounded by white matter, in some white matter is surrounded by gray matter. Now let us see what is the difference between the gray matter and white matter. Gray matter, it is composed of nerve cells. Means the cytons and neurons. White matter is composed of nerve fibers. In the white matter there is the presence of nerve fibers, axon dendron. But in gray matter there is only the nerve cells, cyton. In the cerebrum and cerebellum of the brain, white matter is surrounded by gray matter. So, white matter is surrounded by gray matter in cerebrum and cerebellum. In the spinal cord and other parts of the brain, reverse, means the gray matter is surrounded by white matter. So, that is about the gray matter and white matter. Then about the sheath. Sheaths means the covering. Nerve fiber is naked, means no covering within the gray matter. In the gray matter, the nerve fiber, if present, passes through the gray matter, means there is no covering. You can see this portion of the axon is without any covering. Here there are two coverings. Here it is the neurolemma, and these are the sheath, myelin sheath. So, when they are present in the gray matter, they are naked without any covering. When it enters the white matter, it receives the first covering called myelin sheath. When it enters into the white matter, it receives the first covering, that is the myelin sheath. So, which is white, myelin sheath. When it comes out of the central nervous system, means it leaves the central nervous system, brain and spinal cord, it comes out of it, it receives the second covering called neurolemma. You can see this is the second covering, neurolemma. So, two coverings are present. Here this portion is naked, and first covering is myelin sheath and second covering is neurolemma. So, When it enters into the white matter, it receives myelin sheath. It is covered by the first covering, myelin sheath. And when it comes out of the white matter, then it receives the second covering, then it is called neurolemma. The axis ends as a naked process. Here, that is the end of the axis. Here, you see there is no covering. It is naked. So, the axis ends as a naked process without any covering. That means in the beginning there is no covering, and at the end there is no covering. The coverings insulate the nerve fibers. The coverings, they insulate the nerve fibers and increase the speed of conduction and increase the speed of conduction. को रेट रे नर्व इम्पल्स जो पास करिबो स्पीड ऑफ कंडक्शन से स्पीड टाकू रेगुलेट करे किए ना माइलिन sheath. Below the neurolemma is a thin layer of cytoplasm. So, below the neurolemma there is a thin layer of cytoplasm which contains nuclei at intervals. Here see one nucleus, here there is another nucleus, there is interval, not in every place. So, below the neurolemma is a thin layer of cytoplasm which contains nuclei at intervals and called sheath nuclei or nuclei of Schwann cells or nuclei of Schwann cells or nuclei of Schwann cells, that is sheath nucleus or nuclei of Schwann cells. Neurolemma is formed by these nuclei. So, these nuclei they formed the neurolemma. Myelin sheath is formed by axis cylinder. This is the axis cylinder. So, myelin sheath is formed by the axis cylinder. Myelin sheath is interrupted at regular intervals. See, it is not continuous. It is interrupted at regular intervals. ତେଣୁ ଯେଉଁ ଜାଗାରେ myelin sheath ନାହିଁ ସେଠି neurolemma comes in direct contact with the axis cylinder. Axis cylinder ଉପରେ ସେ ଲାଗିକି ରହିଲା, ଏଠି myelin sheath ନାହିଁ, ତେଣୁ it is interrupted at regular intervals about 1 millimeter. Hence, the nerve fiber appears to be constricted. এটা continuous ନୁହଁ, constricted, ଗୋଟେ ଜାଗାରେ constricted. The constricted regions called nodes of Ranvier. This is called as a node of Ranvier. This is another node of Ranvier. This is another node of Ranvier. So, they are called as nodes of Ranvier, where neurolemma is in direct contact with axis cylinder. It is gotiye matra covering rohuchi neurolemma. So, direct contact with, in contact with axis cylinder. Then sensory and motor fibers. The afferent fibers arising from the surface receptors. आमर बॉडी रो सरफेस रे जो रिसेप्टर सब रही सेल तेणु से जो फाइबर गुड़ाक बाहरिला. द afferent fibers arising from the surface receptors which include eye, ear, nose, skin, etc. These are the receptors, surface receptors, eye, ear, nose and skin, etc. So, the afferent fibers arising from the surface receptors are called somatic sensory, are called somatic, means from the body surface. So, somatic sensory, and those arising from visceral receptors, body भितरे जो receptor रही आमर जो different organ ता देहरु जदि आसिला ताले सेगुड़ा को कुआ जीवो visceral sensory fibers. तेणु surface रु जो आसुची the afferent fibers arising from the surface receptors, eye, ear, nose, skin, etc. are called somatic sensory, and those arising from the visceral receptors are called visceral sensory fibers. Similarly, the efferent fibers ending in striated muscles, the efferent fibers ending in striated muscles are called somatic motor, and ending in smooth muscles are called visceral motor fibers. Then synapse. Synapse means it is the connection between one axon and one dendron. So synapse, so one axon means it is the terminal point of one neuron, and then dendron is the beginning point, starting point of another neuron. So that junction is known as the synapse. So synapse, it may be axosomatic, axosomatic. Axosomatic means it is the presynaptic terminal of axon ends on the cell body of postsynaptic neuron. Postsynaptic neuron ro cell body ऊपर end ही जीवो axon टा. Presynaptic neuron तार जो axon से end हला cell body ऊपर direct. तेणु ताकु कुआ गला axosomatic. These are in the cerebellum. These are in the cerebellum. Then axodendritic synapse. Axodendritic synapse. These are under electron microscope studied. There is no physical contact. There is no physical contact, and the gap is known as synaptic cleft, and it is one-way traffic, means impulse will go from axon to the dendron, not back from dendron to axon. So one-way traffic. And here the neurotransmitter which transmits this impulse is acetylcholine, So that is about the nervous tissue. Now one tissue is left, so I will tell you only about 5 minutes. You will study in detail. So muscular tissue means it is a mesodermal in origin. Nervous tissue, as I told you, it is ectodermal in origin. It is mesodermal in origin, and it is responsible for movements in most animals. Almost there is no intercellular substance. Muscle cells of varying length, each is called a fiber. So muscle fiber, we call it as a muscle fiber. So muscle cells are of varying length, and each is called as a fiber. These are surrounded and hold together by connective tissues. These muscle fibers are held together by connective tissues. They have ability to contract. That is the main chief function. They have ability to contract. Then basing on structure, they are of 3 categories: striated, unstriated, and cardiac. Then basing on physiology, they are voluntary and involuntary. So voluntary means which are under the control of the will. आमे इच्छा कले ताकू कॉन्ट्रैक्ट करई परिबा. जेमिति धर आमर हाथटा आमे चाहिले बंकई दउछे बिकॉज ऑफ द मसल्स हियर आर प्रेजेंट. ताकू चाहिले कॉन्ट्रैक्शन आमे निज इच्छा अनुसार करूचे, पुणी सीधा कर पारुचे. किंतु स्टोमाक रे बा बॉडी भितर जो मसल रही ताकू आम कंट्रोल ले नाही. सेगुडा कला इनवॉल्यूंटरी. तेणु फिजियोलॉजिकली 2टा कैटेगरी, गोटे वॉल्यूंटरी आ गोटे इनवॉल्यूंटरी. अच्छा, ये जो बेसिंग ऑन स्ट्रक्चर स्ट्राइटेड, अनस्ट्राइटेड एंड कार्डियाक. स्ट्राइटेड मसल गुड़ाक तार डिफरेंट रिजियन रोची. स्ट्राइटेड होगी रोची धर अल्टरनेट डार्क एंड लाइट बैंड्स. दिस इज द डार्क बैंड, this is the light band, this is again dark band, again light band, then dark band. So, striated muscle like this, alternate bands. This is the dark band, this is the light band, that is known as striated muscle. And unstriated means there is no striation. They are also known as smooth muscles. And cardiac muscles, it is a combination of these two categories, we can say, and this is present in the heart, cardiac muscle. Muscular tissue is not that difficult. You can read at home, and if possible we may discuss in the next class. Okay, thank you.